Megan Williams' hidden legacy, the janitor who built it all. In the heart of Chicago, among the sleek glass towers and polished office spaces, stood Fitzgerald Consulting, a firm renowned for its influence in the corporate world. The company had grown over the years, attracting some of the most ambitious minds in the industry, yet beneath the surface of success, the same story was unfolding, one of overlooked employees and neglected values. Megan Williams was one such overlooked employee. Every morning, she donned a simple blue uniform, a cleaning cart in tow, and began her rounds, quietly mopping the floors and scrubbing away the messes left behind by the office's elite. To the management team, Megan was invisible, a fixture in the background of their daily lives, nothing more than a janitor who made the space shine, yet never deserving of attention. What they didn't know was that Megan was not just any janitor. She was, in fact, the founder and majority shareholder of Fitzgerald Consulting, the very company that had grown under her vision and hard work. Years ago, she had stepped back from day-to-day operations, passing the reins of leadership to her cousin, Henry Williams, who became the CEO after Megan's health began to decline. Despite her absence from the spotlight, Megan had remained deeply invested in the success of her company, watching from the sidelines to see if the values she had built it on, integrity, respect, and fairness, were still being honored. But as the years passed, it became clear to Megan that something had gone wrong. The company had become a shadow of its former self. The higher-ups, including CEO Henry Williams, had lost sight of the foundational principles that had made Fitzgerald Consulting thrive. Arrogance, greed, and an unhealthy focus on profits had taken hold, and the employees who were once respected were now mere cogs in a machine. Megan spent her days cleaning, all the while observing how the company was changing. She saw the way the executives treated the support staff, like invisible servants meant to handle the unglamorous tasks. Her heart ached as she overheard conversations laced with disdain, where employees like her were deemed replaceable, their worth only measured by their ability to keep the office spotless. It was clear that Henry, her cousin and CEO, had lost his way. Yet, Megan knew she had to stay patient. She had built this company with her own hands, and it was not going to slip through her fingers without a fight. She endured the indignities, knowing that she had to fully understand the depth of the corruption before revealing her true identity. The turning point came when Megan overheard a conversation between Henry and his chief strategist, Rachel. "We can always replace them," Rachel sneered, talking about the janitorial staff like they were expendable. "They can't do anything else. If it wasn't for them cleaning, no one would even notice they're here." Megan felt a knot form in her stomach as she wiped down the counters, forcing herself to stay calm. The words hurt, but they also solidified her resolve. This was no longer about cleaning up messes, this was about reclaiming what was hers. The time had come. Megan was no longer going to stand in the shadows. She would take back control of her company and restore the values it was built upon. And when the moment arrived, it would be her, Megan Williams, the janitor no one noticed, who would decide the fate of the very company she created. The story was far from over, but Megan was ready to step out of the background and show everyone the true power of leadership, integrity, and the strength of a woman who had built it all from the ground up. The CEO's arrogance and harassment, a reckoning for power. At the towering offices of Hargraves and Company, the city's premier consulting firm, there was an unspoken rule: the higher you were in the hierarchy, the more invisible those beneath you became. The executives, clad in their expensive suits and adorned with the arrogance of their success, rarely gave a second thought to the people who made their business run smoothly: the cleaners, the assistants, the support staff. These employees were mere tools in a well-oiled machine, nothing more than a backdrop to the high-powered decisions happening in the boardrooms. Among these overlooked workers was Ava Thompson, a quiet janitor who had been with Hargraves and Company for nearly a decade. Her job was humble: mopping floors, taking out trash, and making sure the office looked pristine for the powerful figures who walked through its halls. But Ava wasn't just a janitor. She was the backbone of the company, quietly observing how the firm's leadership, especially CEO Nathaniel Stone, treated those below them. Nathaniel Stone, with his sharp suits and cold demeanor, was the embodiment of arrogance. His leadership style was one of superiority, where no one beneath him could measure up. He prided himself on his cutthroat approach, believing that the lower ranks were disposable. Alongside him, his chief operating officer, Vanessa Reed, shared his view, treating the support staff with disdain. It wasn't just an air of superiority, it was a palpable, dehumanizing arrogance that seeped into every interaction. But Ava noticed something disturbing. Over time, Nathaniel's dismissive behavior escalated into something more personal, something much darker. His arrogance was no longer limited to ignoring the staff, he began to make her uncomfortable in ways that crossed professional boundaries. At first, it was subtle, a comment about her uniform, a joke about how she must enjoy working hard for so little. But it didn't stop there. One afternoon, as Ava was cleaning the glass windows of Nathaniel's office, he approached her with a smug smile. "You know, Ava," he said in a tone that made her skin crawl, "you clean up well, but I think you could do more. I've seen how you look at the higher-ups, maybe it's time you moved up." His words were casual, but his eyes told another story. Ava recoiled, but kept her composure. She knew what he was insinuating. This wasn't just about cleaning anymore, this was about power, control, and manipulation. His comments became bolder, and the glances he gave her lingered far too long. He was testing boundaries, using his position to make her feel small and insignificant, while pretending to offer her something in return for her compliance. The more Nathaniel pushed, the more Ava's anger simmered beneath the surface. She had worked hard her entire life, building a career from the ground up, only to be reduced to a target of harassment by someone who believed he could get away with anything. His arrogance had blinded him to the fact that his actions had consequences. He thought he could control her, belittle her, and manipulate her without ever facing any repercussions. But Ava was about to make him see that no one, no matter how powerful, was above accountability. One evening, as Ava was finishing her shift, Nathaniel cornered her in the parking garage. The tension in the air was thick, and his predatory smile sent a wave of unease through her. "You've been working so hard lately, Ava," he said, his voice low and almost threatening. "Maybe it's time you stopped cleaning and started taking care of the people who matter here. I could help you, you know. A little cooperation goes a long way." Ava's heart raced, but she stood her ground. The time for patience was over. She had endured his advances long enough. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice steady but filled with warning, "you've crossed a line. If you ever try this again, I will make sure you regret it. I've had enough of your arrogance and disrespect." For a moment, Nathaniel's confidence faltered, his face shifting from smirk to surprise. But Ava knew this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. The time had come to expose the toxic culture Nathaniel had fostered, and she would make sure that his arrogance would be his downfall. The next morning, Ava walked into the office not as the invisible janitor, but as the person who would take back what was hers. She was no longer the one cleaning up after others. Ava Thompson was here to clean house, and Nathaniel Stone's reign of arrogance and harassment was about to come to a sudden, painful end. Sophia's decision to act, reclaiming her power. For years, Sophia James had watched her company, Vortex Solutions, evolve from a small startup to a giant in the tech industry. What started as a dream in a small apartment had grown into a billion-dollar empire. But as the company soared, something darker began to creep in. Sophia had stepped back from the daily operations several years ago due to health issues, handing the reins to her cousin, Thomas James. Though her presence in the office was no longer as noticeable, she still had a watchful eye over her creation. However, as time passed, it became clear that Vortex Solutions was changing, and not for the better. The values that Sophia had instilled in the company, integrity, hard work, and respect, had slowly been overshadowed by greed and arrogance. The new leadership, especially Thomas, had turned the company into a machine driven solely by profit. He had grown distant, detached from the people who had helped build the company from the ground up. The employees who had once felt valued were now treated as expendable tools, and the higher-ups became more condescending with every passing day. It wasn't just the arrogance of Thomas that troubled Sophia, it was the way he treated her. She had always respected him as family, but now, he seemed to believe that he was above her. He dismissed her ideas, ignored her advice, and, most disturbingly, began to show an inappropriate sense of entitlement toward her. Sophia had endured his arrogant comments and dismissive attitude for far too long. His arrogance had reached new heights when he began making advances toward her, masking them with false kindness and promises of career advancement. Each time, Sophia had smiled politely, her anger growing inside but keeping her cool, knowing the time to act was not yet right. But when one afternoon, Thomas crossed the line by cornering her in the executive lounge, making a veiled comment about her role in the company, it was clear to Sophia that enough was enough. "You know, Sophia," he said with a predatory smile, "if you played your cards right, I could make you part of something bigger here. You don't belong on the sidelines. You belong with me." Sophia's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto his, no longer seeing him as family but as the man who had disrespected her for too long. Her voice was steady, yet tinged with cold resolve. "Thomas, if you think for 1 second that you can manipulate me like this, you're mistaken," she said, her words like steel. "You've crossed a line, and there will be consequences for it." For the first time, she saw doubt flicker across his face, his confidence faltering. He took a step back, his arrogance cracking. Sophia knew it was time. The time for patience, for watching from the sidelines, was over. She had built this company from the ground up, and she wasn't going to let anyone, especially not her own family, destroy everything she had worked for. The next morning, Sophia walked into the office with a different air about her. Gone was the quiet observer, the woman who had once been content to blend in with the background. She stepped into the boardroom, not as the janitor or the invisible founder, but as the person who had the right to reclaim what was hers. As she strode toward the head of the table, the room grew silent. Thomas and the rest of the management team looked up, their faces pale as realization dawned on them. Sophia stood tall, no longer hiding in the shadows, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of her power return. "I am Sophia James," she said, her voice unwavering. "And this is my company." The room fell into stunned silence. Thomas, once so arrogant and confident, now stood motionless, his composure shattered. The facade was over. It was time for Sophia to take control of her company once again. Effective immediately, Sophia continued, her voice cool but commanding, "You're fired, Thomas. You've failed to uphold the values of this company, and I can no longer allow you to lead it. Your actions have consequences." As Thomas stumbled to find words, his arrogance replaced by fear, Sophia knew there was no turning back. It was time to restore the integrity that Vortex Solutions had once thrived on. And this time, it would be led by someone who truly cared, someone who had built it all from the ground up. Sophia's decision had been made, and she was ready to rebuild the company she had once created, stronger and more respected than ever before. The time for silence had passed. It was now her turn to lead. Maya's reveal as CEO, the power of silence. The next morning, everything changed. Maya Matthews walked through the lobby of Madison Enterprises not as the janitor everyone had come to ignore, but as the woman who had built it all. No longer wearing the blue uniform that had blended her into the background, she stepped into the sleek, polished offices of the very company she had founded, her head held high with a quiet confidence. The time for silence had passed, it was now time to reclaim what was rightfully hers. For years, Maya had been watching from the shadows. After stepping back from day-to-day operations due to a personal decision to focus on her health, she had allowed her cousin, Derek Matthews, to take over as CEO. He had always been the more charismatic one, the face that the public knew. Maya had never craved the spotlight, but she had never intended for the company she founded to lose its core values in the process. It had become clear to Maya that Derek had strayed far from the principles that had made Madison Enterprises great. Greed, corruption, and arrogance had crept in, and the company that had once valued integrity and respect was now driven solely by profit. Derek's behavior toward the employees, especially those in lower-ranking positions, was increasingly condescending and disrespectful. Maya, who had once been the guiding force behind every decision, had watched as Derek's disregard for the people who had helped build the company grew more apparent each day. But the breaking point had come when Derek, in his usual dismissive manner, began to belittle her role, mocking her efforts and minimizing her contributions, all while continuing to let his ego and unchecked power run rampant. The comments about her worth, the dismissals of her ideas, and the continued mistreatment of her fellow employees had become too much. Maya knew it was time to act. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let Derek tarnish everything she had built. The morning after their last heated exchange, Maya entered the office with a new purpose. She had spent enough time in the shadows, quietly observing, waiting for the right moment. And that moment had arrived. As she passed the reception desk, the employees who had once ignored her now stared at her with disbelief. Maya, in a perfectly tailored suit and her hair styled in a way that made her feel powerful, walked toward the executive floor. The atmosphere shifted as she moved through the hallways. The janitor was gone. The founder was standing tall, ready to take her place once again. When Maya entered the boardroom, a wave of confusion washed over the executives. They had seen her before, of course. She was the quiet janitor, the one who cleaned the floors and emptied the trash. But this time, she was not cleaning. She was standing at the head of the table. She stood next to Derek, her cousin and the CEO, but the surprise was palpable. "This is Maya Matthews," Derek stammered, his voice faltering for the first time in years. "The founder of Madison Enterprises." His face drained of color as he looked from her to the rest of the room. Maya didn't need to say a word. Her presence alone was enough to silence the room. For years, Derek had overlooked her, treated her as though she was invisible, but now the tables had turned. She was no longer the janitor he could mock, she was the woman who had built this empire, and now she was taking it back. "You failed this company, Derek," Maya said, her voice steady and filled with authority. "You've compromised its integrity, you've mistreated employees, and you've disregarded everything this company was founded on. I can no longer let this go on." Derek's usual smugness crumbled. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time, he was the one silenced. With a glance, Maya made it clear there was no turning back. Effective immediately, she continued, "You're fired. And don't think for a second that I will let you walk away without consequences. Legal action will follow." The room remained silent, the weight of her words settling over everyone. Derek's face flushed with embarrassment as he stood, attempting to regain his composure, but Maya could see the fear in his eyes. He was no longer in control. Maya's steady gaze told him everything he needed to know. His arrogance had come to an end. The rest of the executives, once smug in their power, now watched Maya with new eyes. Some of them had underestimated her. They had laughed at her when they thought she was just the janitor, but now, they saw the founder, the woman who had built this company from nothing, and the force she had become. "I will restore Madison Enterprises to its core values," Maya declared, turning to face the room. "This company was founded on integrity, respect, and hard work. It will thrive again, but only under leadership that truly values these principles. For those who have contributed to the toxic culture here, there will be consequences. For those who believe in what Madison Enterprises stands for, your jobs are secure." As Derek was escorted out, Maya remained in the boardroom, her mind already focused on the work ahead. The journey to rebuild Madison Enterprises would be challenging, but it was one she was prepared for. This time, the company would be led with respect, innovation, and integrity, principles that had always been at its core. Maya Matthews had finally revealed herself, and nothing would ever be the same again. The janitor was gone, but the founder was back, and she was ready to take her company, and its future, into her hands. Firing of CEO and corrupt management, a new beginning for the company. The room was silent as Clara James stood before the board, her gaze steady, unwavering. She had always believed in the core values that had built Apex Solutions, a company founded on integrity, fairness, and respect. But for too long, those values had been corrupted, buried under layers of arrogance, greed, and exploitation. It was time to change that. Clara had stepped back from the day-to-day management of Apex years ago due to personal reasons, trusting her cousin, Henry James, to lead the company in her absence. Henry, however, had abandoned the principles that made Apex successful. He had turned the company into a money-driven machine, where employees were treated as expendable, and profits were the only measure of success. The once strong foundation of the company had crumbled under his leadership. Clara had patiently observed the downfall from the sidelines, but the time for patience was over. She had watched as Henry's arrogance grew, as his condescending attitude toward the lower-ranking employees became more pronounced. She had seen firsthand how he and the other board members dismissed the hard work and dedication of those who made the company run. His treatment of the staff had reached new lows, with many employees openly humiliated by his rude behavior and unprofessional conduct. But what finally pushed Clara to act was the toxic culture that had taken root under his leadership, the culture that valued power over people, money over morals. Clara walked into the boardroom that morning, ready to restore the integrity that had been lost. Henry, who had once treated her like an invisible figure, now looked nervous, his usual cocky demeanor fading in the face of her unshakable confidence. She could see the discomfort in his eyes, the realization that his time was up. With a calm but firm voice, Clara addressed the room. Effective immediately, she said, her words cutting through the tense air, Henry James is no longer the CEO of Apex Solutions. His actions have led this company into a toxic environment, and I can no longer allow him to lead. You have failed in upholding the values that this company was built on. Henry opened his mouth to protest, but Clara's gaze silenced him. She wasn't interested in his excuses. The damage had been done. It was time for change. And as for the rest of the board, Clara continued, you have all played a role in fostering this environment. The arrogance, the dismissiveness, the toxic culture, none of you are exempt from accountability. Effective immediately, you are all dismissed. Apex Solutions will no longer be a company where power is abused, where respect is an afterthought. This company will be rebuilt from the ground up, with integrity as its foundation. The room was frozen, the weight of Clara's words sinking in. Henry's face turned an ashen shade of gray as he realized that his reign was over. The arrogance that had once defined him melted away, replaced by the stark reality that he had failed. Clara had taken back control. Your actions have consequences, Clara added, addressing the rest of the board. For those of you who believe in the values that made this company great, there is still a place for you here. But for those of you who have contributed to this toxic culture, I'm afraid your time here is done. Clara turned to the employees in the room, her voice filled with warmth and resolve. To the employees who have endured this culture, I want you to know that change is coming. This company will once again be a place where your hard work is respected, where your contributions are valued, and where fairness and integrity are the cornerstones of our success. I will not let the vision of this company die. We will rebuild, and we will thrive again. With the firing of Henry and the corrupt board members, Clara had not just reclaimed her company, she had reclaimed the values that were meant to guide it. Apex Solutions would no longer be driven by ego or exploitation. It would be led by someone who believed in respect, fairness, and integrity. As Henry was escorted out of the building by security, Clara remained in the boardroom, her heart steady but filled with a sense of accomplishment. The hard work was just beginning. She would need to rebuild, to restore trust, to show the employees that things could be different. But Clara was ready. She had reclaimed control, and now she would lead Apex Solutions back to greatness. And with that, a new chapter began for the company, a chapter that would be written with the values that had once made it successful and would once again lead it to thrive. Lena's vision for the future, a new era for the company. Lena Carter stood by the window of her office, staring out over the cityscape of New York, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The path had been long, filled with moments of uncertainty and painful realizations. She had rebuilt more than just a company, she had reclaimed the very principles on which it was founded. Now, with the company's future in her hands, she felt the weight of the responsibility settle over her, yet she also felt a fire within her, a determination to ensure that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. The first step had been to remove the toxic leadership that had once held the company captive, but that was only the beginning. Lena knew that rebuilding would not be quick or easy. It would take time, effort, and, above all, a commitment to the values that had initially made this company thrive: respect, integrity, and fairness. The journey to restore what had been lost was just beginning, but Lena was ready. She had seen the impact of poor leadership, and now it was time to build a foundation that would last for generations to come. When Lena had taken the reins of Sterling Enterprises, she had been faced with a choice: she could follow in the footsteps of those who had come before her, sacrificing the company's core values for the sake of growth and profit, or she could build something different, a company that would not only thrive financially but also serve as a place where employees felt respected, valued, and empowered. She had chosen the latter, and while the path would be difficult, she knew it was the only way forward. As she looked out over the bustling streets below, Lena thought about the employees who had stood by her, who had believed in the vision she had shared with them. She had promised them a company where they would be treated as partners, not just workers. A place where their ideas would be heard, and where their contributions would be celebrated. She was committed to ensuring that the toxic culture of fear and intimidation was gone for good, replaced by a culture of collaboration, support, and mutual respect. Lena knew that the work ahead of her would take time. Restoring trust would be one of the biggest challenges, but it was something she was prepared to face head-on. She would lead by example, showing her employees that integrity would always come before profits, and that power would never again be used as a weapon to control or manipulate. The future of Sterling Enterprises was bright, but it would require everyone to be part of the journey. Lena knew that the company's strength came not just from its leadership, but from the people who made it run day in and day out. She would continue to build an environment where they could thrive, where their voices would be heard, and where they could grow both personally and professionally. The days of ignoring the well-being of employees were over. It was time to create something sustainable, a company that was not only successful but also a source of pride for all who were a part of it. As Lena turned away from the window and faced the team gathered in the conference room, she knew the hard work was just beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was confident that with the right leadership and the right people by her side, they would emerge stronger than ever. Now, she was ready to begin the next chapter of Sterling Enterprises' story, and she was more determined than ever to make sure that it would be one written with integrity, respect, and fairness. What do you think about Lena's journey and the future of Sterling Enterprises? Do you believe a company can thrive when its core values are prioritized? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories of leadership and transformation. Let's continue this conversation together.